This
hereby
conference
call
will now be recorded.
I hereby call the Monday, November 25, 2024 meeting of the Board of Finance to order, it being 7 o'clock. So, Kathleen, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Of course.
All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kathleen. Appreciate it. Minutes for the last meeting. Can I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Second.
One addendum to that, Kathy had a couple of edits that she's going to send Christine.
I had a couple too that I gave, and Brian also gave one.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
you got those.
Minor.
Yeah, I'll email it to you. Should we just say as amended then, Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry?
Should we make the motion to approve the minutes as amended?
All right.
We're sending to Christine.
All right, so Christine, you got the proposed notations?
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next item on the agenda is communications from the audience. Do we have anyone that wants to communicate, bearing in mind that we will run the 3 minutes tightly this time? Going once, going twice. Done with communications from the audience. Communications from members. Anything? All right, we're up to item.
Something, Houston.
Okay, go ahead.
Since this isn't on the agenda, but it has come up in the last two meetings, I wanted to talk about the softball field. And the request from one of the members of the Board of Finance to review the financials of the Little League, who had committed $100,000 to our effort in making our softball field up to par with the rest of our baseball field. And I wanted to mention that it is a liability for the town of Avon to provide adequate facilities, or I should say equitable facilities, for both boys and girls. And what happens in the town of Avon is that everybody plays together at a very young age, and they play on wonderful fields that the town has provided. And then when they reach a certain age to separate between boys and girls, the girls go to fields that are vastly inadequate. The town of Avon is at risk and has that as an obligation to make equitable fields available for girls in the same level of quality as for girls. Not only is it a legal responsibility, but it is an ethical one as well. Recognizing that this is a noble effort and an equitable effort on the town of Avon, the Little League decided to donate some to us in support of that equity. They didn't have to, but the obligation is ours no matter what. And I akin to that of offering to buy somebody a drink and they want to check your wallet to see if they can afford dinner, to see if you can afford dinner instead. And I think that's a grand way to change somebody's generosity toward you. If we look at a donation with scrutiny, it could just go away. So I implore the members of the board who think that it is their responsibility to scrutinize a donation to drop it. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay, my memory is, well, certainly it was discussed, no doubt about that. It wasn't part of the motion. So at the moment, I think we're on good grounds that I don't expect it's going to be scrutinized. I expect the money will show up as our money will show up. So, all right, but I appreciate your comments. Finance Director, Tom, I believe that's yours. Take it away, as they say.
Were there any other comments?
Was there any other comments?
Oh, sorry. All right. Didn't realize I had other comments. Go ahead. Who else's comments?
Yeah, it's hard when you're not here, Houston, I get it. So just back to the minutes, so Kathy had brought up at the last meeting about our neighbors in Canton having their board meeting before a lot of work went in on the part of the town manager and the Board of Finance, the Board of Education on their budgets.
Yep.
And I don't want to really let that slip by. Brandon, you weren't here last time, so I don't know if you had any communication on that or.
No, Houston, I think you did say you were going to talk to Brandon about that, and I haven't heard that conversation took place.
Brandon and I have chatted. We have not reached a conclusion. I understand it's not the way we have normally done, so I will have further communications with Brandon.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Any more communications from members? Going once, going twice. All right. Now, Tom, take it away.
All right,
Assuming, of course, Tom's there.
I am here. Thank you, Houston. So I'll give you the monthly financial report for October 2024. One thing to note on the report, at the suggestion of the board, I added a column to the report to kind of give you a prorate, straight line picture of what the appropriation looks like throughout the fiscal year. I might tweak that going forward just because some of these line items, it doesn't really, like some of the revenues don't really trend on a straight line basis. So I might try to improve that a little bit going forward.
Great.
But in terms of the activity that's presented, there's not much that's going to be too surprising here. Property tax and assessments continue to trend in a very similar manner to how they have in previous fiscal years, including last year. License fees and permits continue to be driven by building permit fees and recording and conveyance revenues. They're coming in a little bit higher this year, driven primarily by building permit fees. As far as intergovernmental grant receipts, we did receive a couple state grants in the month of October for education cost sharing and municipal revenue sharing. This is in line with the typical state schedule of these grant payments. Charges for services continue to run consistent with preceding years. The figures that we're showing here pertain primarily to landfill permit fees, Board of Ed program and service revenue, and recreation program fees. The biggest line item included in this category is special ed interdistrict tuition revenue, which is not received till towards the end of the fiscal year. Finally, with regards to revenues, we have other local revenues that continue to be driven by interest income. We shift down to expenditures. You can see that town operating expenditures are coming in at about 43%. As we've noted in preceding reports, earlier on in the fiscal year, that could kind of be inflated by a lot of annual expenditures that are incurred early in the fiscal year. When those are removed from consideration, we're trending at about 35%. And all of this is generally in line with expectations as demonstrated by the graphs on the second page of the report, which show specifically expenditures trending very similarly to the way that they have over the last 3 fiscal years. And so that's the general summary of this report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Does anybody have questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just have one question. Tom, I just wanted to ask, health and social services, it shows that we're 83% spent already. Do we anticipate a need to have more funding this year, or, and if so, how would that?
Well,
About-
so that's primarily driven by the Uniform Relocation Assistance
That's what
Act.
That's what I thought.
So that's driving that increase, and, you know, we plan to monitor this and monitor the general fund budget as a whole as we go throughout the fiscal year. But one of the proposals that's included in the year-end booklet is to place an assignment on fund balance that would be a potential funding source that could be utilized to help with that overage if necessary.
That's what I thought, I wasn't sure. Thank you.
Further questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, moving on to old business. 24/25-02, the 200 Fisher Drive proposed property acquisition. Who is going to speak on that? Brandon, is that you, or is Bridget Carnamola also there?
Well, Houston, it kind of depends on how you'd like to go forward with this. So the action that's in front of the Board of Finance tonight is to approve the recommended motion that's included in your packets. And the effect of that motion is to move the question on to the special town meeting that would then be scheduled for December 10th. So that's the action that we're looking for tonight. You know, from there, it's really up to you and the board. You know, both Bridget and I have given this presentation a couple of times now. We gave it to the council back in September. We've had it posted online. I gave a somewhat abbreviated version of the presentation to the Board of Finance. I think it was back in September.
It was.
September, right. So we can kind of go through that again, or we can just move the question. It's up to you and the board.
I think my preference would be I would like to have a little more stuff. I understand that the bulk of it's going to be at the public meeting, but if we could just have a little bit of a refresher of our September presentation, bearing in mind that the costs have changed slightly.
Well, in that case, I think, Bridget, if it's okay with you, do you want to start off just like we did back in September with the council? And we can work off of that PowerPoint presentation?
Whatever you want us to do, if you want us to go back to the presentation again, we will.
Yeah, I think what I would like to see in Houston, if you wanted to see more than this, a summary of the options that we had. Maybe start with the condition of our current building, and then a summary of the options that were explored, which were, correct me if I'm wrong, renovating the current building,
Correct.
purchasing and renovating a different building, purchasing and renovating 200 Fisher Drive, which is the question today, and a cost analysis of lease. Were something available to lease, which my understanding is there isn't, but a good faith effort on cost were something available.
Sure. So what I'll do then is kind of jump, this is about halfway into the presentation that I gave last time. So one of the things that I stressed back in September when we first introduced this level of detail is that this is not a new issue we're trying to solve. You know, this problem with the Board of Ed Central Administration Office building on Simsbury Road does have some antiquity to it. In fact, you can go back to 2014. We had an assessment done at that point. We have language in the Plan of Conservation and Development that reflects that the building has outlived its useful life. So there is a really good basis for proceeding with this project. So in terms of available options, there were basically four that we looked at. We looked at renovating the existing building. We looked at renovating and expanding the existing building. We looked at building new on the existing site. We looked at the lease option, and then we looked at purchasing an existing facility. So if we go to the next slide here, I can just kind of quickly walk you through these. Oh gosh, I can't see that. My eyes are wet. So option one with renovating the existing building. The existing building is a disaster. I'll just be completely candid. You've probably heard me say something along those lines before. It just isn't fit for the purpose that it's being used for. There is significant water damage in the basement due to repeated flooding events. We have significant ADA accessibility issues that need to be corrected. And there are a litany of capital improvements that are necessary for that building. Everything from plumbing to mechanical, electrical systems that need to be addressed if there were any desire to stay in place. So some of the impact of this is blunted because part of what Bridget did a great job with on the front end of this presentation is the show and tell. And there were a number of photographs and good descriptions about really the deplorable conditions that exist inside that building. So if you go to the next slide, you can see here that we also looked at a second option, option 1B. And this option is to renovate and expand the existing building, recognizing that the existing building is insufficient for the space needs of the central administration, even if it were brought up to the appropriate condition and appropriate codes.
May I interject right here? How much space are we using today, including the basement? I'm trying to sort of baseline myself here as to what do we have today for space, and then what is the space that's needed? Not the redesign, but say 5,000 square feet is what we are using today. I want to understand what we're using today versus construct 7320. Is that what we need if we were to have the space that we need for what we're trying to accommodate right now?
So just, thank you. To be clear, we're taking these numbers from the assessment report that was done by the architects and the engineers with the town, not tape measuring ourselves, so to speak. So this is all in the existing conditions report as what was given back to us.
Are you confident with those numbers that were given to you?
As far as I can be, yes. So
Okay.
what I can tell you is we're using every square inch of the building we're in right now.
And how much is that?
It is,
I think it's confusing the way they do it, I'll be quite honest. It's
This is why I'm asking for the clarification.
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. We're just reading this out of the report from square footage basis.
Thought you had 7,000 on the first floor and 6,000.
Yeah, it's
It's about that.
It's about 13,009 something. And then there's existing building area, so 13,660, I believe is the right number.
Yeah, that's the gross square
Footage.
footage.
Right now that we're using?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of it is storage space, some of it is inventory space, some of it is cubicles, offices, bathroom, everything.
Just that some of it isn't as usable as it should be, given the condition it's in.
So what we're looking for, if I,
The entirety in terms of what space we have at central office, the folks we have working there, and what we should have in terms of working space, what a normal operating working space for most other folks is, they determined that this is the best, the need would be to renovate what we have and add on the additional space.
okay, so I'm at about 21,320 as the needed for,
As recommended by them,
That's what was
okay.
recommended.
is recommended.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
All right, So that's option 1B, is to renovate and expand the existing building. So on the next slide, what you're going to see is just kind of a side-by-side comparison of the dollars that we're looking at associated with those two options. And it should be noted that these estimates were prepared by the architect that did the existing conditions study, both on the building on Simsbury Drive and 200 Fisher Drive. So these aren't our estimates. We had input, of course. They're done by the architect. So you can see just the renovation alone for the existing building, it's about 4.6 million. You've got 250,000 in site improvements. Furniture, fixture, and equipment is about 150. Architectural and engineer fees are 504. And then we would have to have a temporary facility for the Board of Ed while the site was under construction. So you add all of that up, you get to about $5.7 million. The next block, that simply expands it. So this is the renovation plus the additional space. And again, you've got renovation cost about 4.6 million. The additional space is 3.8. Site improvement, we go up to 400,000. FF&E 250, A&E fees 850, temporary facility is 190,000. So for the renovate and expand, we're up over 10 million. So options 1A and 1B, and if we go to the next slide, this is just building new on the existing site. So the assumptions that we worked off of were that we would need between 18,000 and 20,000 square feet. It would be a two-story structure on 34 Simsbury Road. And the estimate that was developed for that project would be between 11.5 million and just about 13 million. So 1A, 1B, option 2, and then this is the lease option. So candidly, the lease option we dismissed fairly early in the process. And the reason we did that is because we straight up looked at the math. And you know what you're looking at for the grade of commercial office space that we would be looking to lease, if we could find the appropriate space, would be approximately $19 a square foot. If you take $19 a square foot and you just multiply it by 13,000 square feet, which is less than the square footage that we would be acquiring at 200 Fisher Drive, you come up to about $247,000. That's essentially in perpetuity because you're not buying the building. So if you choose a point at which you want to run out that projection and you choose 15 years, which is the typical life of the debt that we would issue, you basically come up to just about $3.7 million. And that's assuming that there haven't been any rent increases during that time. And it's also assuming that the landlord, I suppose, out of their
Kindness of heart.
goodness of their heart, is willing to, donate or somehow provide any capital costs that would be required to outfit the building for the Board of Ed's needs free of charge. Now, incidentally, I've never seen that happen. I'm the chair of a small governmental agency located in Canton. We've talked for years about buying our building simply because when you rent it, you're paying somebody else. You're not building any equity, and that operating cost never goes away. Incidentally, there are also a lot of other reasons that it makes sense for a governmental unit specifically to own its own building. But I think just based on the math, when you run that out, simple cost-benefit analysis, it doesn't wash.
And just to add a point to this option is doing math on 13,000 square feet, which is smaller than what our needs are.
I think we should be clear though, yeah, that when the needs assessment was done on Fisher Drive, we are looking at us occupying just around the same amount of space. Brandon, correct?
Yes, 13,000.
Yeah.
13,000.
So even
Okay.
though the architect said, you'd be best served with X amount, when we went and looked at the place, the drawings and so on, that's part of the due diligence that was done after the fact of finding Fisher, because they weren't done at the same time. So, yeah, it's a different layout of the space also.
So again, to sort of help me get to the baseline that I'm looking for, are you saying that you could live with 13,000? Or the 13,000 you saw in Fisher was livable?
Yes, the 13,000 we saw in Fisher is livable. I mean,
Okay.
one of the differences is, for example, in this building, we have two gang bathrooms. So that's taking up the space of all the stalls in these bathrooms versus single stall bathrooms that are ADA accessible in the other building.
Okay.
Just one example of how things are different.
There's a foyer, right, which we could have like a break space, whereas if we stayed at 34 Fisher, everyone has to eat their desk. There is no space anywhere for anyone to congregate. So there's different things that are recommended that we could go without or make the building itself work to our advantage that would be part of the space of the 13,000 square feet.
Thank you.
So, yes, so that's that's option 3, lease of a facility. And then option 4, which is what we're recommending, is the purchase and renovation of a new pre-owned building. We should call it pre-owned. So,
Existing building.
so this is 200 Fisher Drive, identified as a suitable location. The building is about 20,908 square feet. It was built in 1986. DOE would occupy just over 13,000 square feet to begin with. The building is partially occupied by 3 other tenants at this point. Really, the building is in excellent condition. We have had both the environmental assessment of the property done, no issues have been identified. We had the existing conditions assessment of the building done by the architect. You know, long run, you know, it's gonna need some updates to the electrical system, but the basic core structure of the building is in excellent shape. It's got a rubber membrane roof, all of the right building materials, which isn't surprising because the company that owned the building was a construction company. As I said, the Board of Ed would initially occupy 13,000 square feet of that. We've got a very careful layout of what the Board of Ed's space would look like, how it would be divided into offices and uses. And we also have identified the area of the building where the tenants would be. So I think laying all of that space out, it clearly shows that the central administration, the IT function with some room left over for storage fits very nicely within the available space. If you go to the next slide, this is an exterior shot of the building. So this is, if you drive into the parking lot and you're kind of coming into, I would say that's like the rear of the building, I don't know, heading south. So you walk into those doors and there's a really nice open area. There's kind of an atrium, the elevator's right there. And most of the Board of Ed administration function would be upstairs on the left. That's where the superintendent's office would be. And then the IT function would be downstairs on the lower level on the right. But really good condition. So this is just an interior photograph of an example of the office space. As you can see, it's got a really nice, open, flexible floor plan. One of the areas where we do have to spend some money to begin with, I think the budget's about $650,000, is we need to prepare the building envelope for the Board of Ed's use. So we want to get new carpet in there, some new ceiling tiles, and importantly, because there's a need for privacy, we want to have some floor-to-ceiling walls that are installed and take out those kind of half walls and cubicles. This kind of just gives you a nice aerial shot of where the building is in proximity to the existing building on Simsbury Road, which you can see off to the right there. You can see the town offices at the bottom of the screen, and you can see, of course, Fisher Drive up there at the top. So not very far from their existing location. This is the cost estimate. So what we've got here is a purchase price of $2.25 million. That's a fee simple price. We did have an independent appraiser review that amount, and he provided us a report saying that it was appropriate and within market. We've got financing costs there, about $63,800. Those are a little bit low because if this is approved, we would be putting it out to bond at the same time, most likely as the rating project, which is coming to a conclusion. So financing costs like, paying the financial advisor, the bonding fees, the bonding counsel, those would be shared. The site improvements there, those are basically all of the interior improvements that need to be made to get the building into move-in condition for the Board of Education. And I want to stress again that there really isn't anything huge in that building that needs to be done. You don't have to put in an elevator, the elevator's there. It really is just carpet, it is partitions, it's walls, it's not systems or anything like that. And then you get to information technology. That's all of your racks, your switches, your phones, your computers, and that's $219,546. Each of these numbers, well, with the exception of the financing costs, has been reviewed and prepared by an outside party to make sure that we're picking everything up. I would also say that in terms of the purchase price, as you know, I've reported out in past Board of Finance meetings, we do have a buy-sell agreement in place with the seller. So that brings it down to $3,187,000, which is below the threshold for an appropriation requiring referendum approval, which is why we're talking about a special town meeting to get an appropriation for the project. And this here, I think, is just more detail about the scope of work. So you can see there, renovating the West Wing, programming needs of the superintendent's office, assistant superintendent's offices. You're talking about selective demolition and drywall partitions, construction of new interior full-height partitions, some modifications of existing HVAC systems, lighting and fire suppression for the new office layout, ADA compliant single-use restroom, and new paint and carpet tiles throughout the renovated area. And then downstairs in the IT area, we're looking to, expand, make a larger doorway so they can more easily get their equipment in and out. I think if you go to the next slide, with your leave, it's worth kind of going through this to the end. So this is what the debt modeling looks like. And what you can see here is that the outstanding issued existing debt is in navy blue. So as you know, our debt curve is sloping down. You can see that from 27 to 28, it really drops off. We've got 2 anticipated debt issuances. These are both approved, but we haven't gone to the market yet. These are for the fire engines, and it's for the radio communications system. That's how, the red is how the debt would layer onto the outstanding existing debt. And then number 3, you have the proposed debt, which is what 200 Fisher would look like on top of it. So basically what you see there is in fiscal year 26, fiscal year 27, there's a bit of a blip. The way that we would manage that is we have a couple assignments on fund balance that the Board of Finance had previously approved. One is specifically for debt service in the amount of $750,000 that could be used to level that off. The other technique we've been using for years now, going back to Tom Harrison and Tom Gugliotti and, the old Board of Finance, is that as debt has declined over time, we've been capturing that debt in our capital budget. So debt drops, the capital budget goes up. As a percent of the levy, we try to keep that static. So what we can do here, as we kind of smooth out the modeling, is we can reduce the capital budget ever so slightly so that between the two, we get the levy even for the debt. So that's kind of what the debt picture looks like. It's very manageable, and certainly you can see out in 2028, we really kind of fall off a cliff in a good way. So the idea here is, this is kind of unique in a way, but I think it's a really interesting model that we've come up with to manage the facility. And, you're all very familiar with the general fund, you're familiar with special revenue funds. The one you're most familiar with is the sewer use fund, for instance. So a special revenue fund is created for a specific purpose, a specific function. It has an identified revenue source, and it has an identified expenditure object. So in this case, because we would have lease revenue coming in from lessees of the site at 200 Fisher, we would propose basically doing the same thing. We would create a special revenue fund. We would have revenues coming in from the leases that are in place for the building, which provides a nice offset to the operating cost. And we would also have some level of revenue coming in from the Board of Education as an operating transfer out from their budget. So you think about it now, the Board of Ed pays X amount of dollars a year to maintain their building. Instead of maintaining that building, they do an operating transfer out to contribute to the maintenance of 200 Fisher Drive. And if you go to the next slide, what you see here is that the math is pretty favorable. So this is beginning in fiscal year 26. You can get really great information through the assessor's office. So this is based on real data. This is the gross of what the lessees are paying. We made an allowance for collection loss. That would be our net lease revenue of $119,401. And then we'd be looking at a BOE contribution just to make the revenues balance with the expenditures of $34,509. Note, the current BOE operating costs for the facility on Simsbury Road are about, say, $107,000 this year. When you look at expenditure projections, you've got your utilities, you've got your management and administration, repairs and maintenance, property insurance, and a small replacement reserve for capital. So in this kind of pro forma, you see revenues matching expenditures. Of course, what this doesn't include is any expenditure for debt service, and it wouldn't be typical for us to, burden the debt service of this kind of enterprise, burden this enterprise with this kind of debt service. We would propose just keeping the debt service in the general fund. So it's funny, through the months I've been talking about the project, people kind of say, oh, yeah, I know that needs to be done. What happens to the building? They kind of start with that in mind. So the answer to that is we don't know yet. The building is in terrible condition. Anything that is going to be done with it is going to require some level of capital improvement before that's done. Frankly, I don't really know that there's any practical use for it. Having said that, we're gonna have to go through some kind of a process before the town decides what to do with it. There has been discussion about, selling it off for commercial. I don't think the residents in back would care for that very much. There's been talk about turning it into some kind of museum. I don't think that's a really practical consideration. I think if anything, probably the highest and best use is to tear it down, turn it into a green space, put in a playground, just continue on with the recreation theme that you have at Sperry Park. Not my decision. There's going to be process around that. But what I can tell you is that it's going to cost about $35,000 in utility costs and about $17,000 for the year in snow removal to carry it. Keep the parking lot clear and make sure the pipes don't freeze and cause further damage. So I'll tell you, this has been, we began working on this in earnest. It's been start and stop because there are several other buildings that we looked at, none of which were anywhere near as good a fit as this, either due to their condition or due to the internal layout, or frankly, due to complexities of dealing with the owners in those situations, which those can be complex situations. We identified this building, I think we took our first tour, maybe it was like early spring. So both Bridget and her team, me and my team, along with the outside professionals, have been through it a number of times. It's a great find. It's in a great location. It's in excellent condition. It meets the need. And, here, leaving out the lease option, which again, I don't see it as good business to do that. I've kind of summarized this for you. So you can see option 1A. This is the renovate in place. We've got a cost there of about $5.7 million. We've got the renovation and expand at a cost of $10.1 million. Or we've got the pre-owned, lightly used version, which is with all of the with all of the fit out necessary, is about $3.1 million. And we have funding that is coming in from those leases to offset the operating costs for the facility. So continues to be our recommendation. I think this is the right move. I think it's the right building. Unfortunately with these boards, you get a sense of the level of effort that's gone into this, but obviously you're not here all day. We have all spent hours, as you would expect, poking through this, dealing with the details, working it out, and I think we collectively think this is a great solution. So where that leaves us is that we have a purchase and sale agreement that we would like to move forward with. We have an appropriation amount that requires approval at the special town meeting, and it is really difficult to schedule these town meetings. There are holidays you can't run afoul of, vacations you can't run afoul of, you've got timing requirements you have to meet. So the recommendation is to have the special town meeting on the 10th, and assuming approval, We go ahead and close sometime during the month of January. We get into the building modifications being made in the spring, and hopefully we're in the process of moving to the new building in the summer.
All right, do any members of the Board of Finance have any questions?
Brian?
So, not necessarily a question, just a comment. Overall, I'm supportive of moving to 200 Fisher Drive. It is a tax-paying entity currently, so my preference would be to try and monetize the existing admin building as opposed to continue to add more green space.
All right, well, I think that's currently beyond the scope of what the motion that we're going to look for. So, but that ultimately will have to be decided. Anything else?
So I just have a question about the financing of this. We're looking at, we haven't discussed it yet tonight, but we have our end of year transfers here. We're looking, from what I'm seeing on this page in the memorandum, that we had $3.7+ million in excess funds. And I add up all these revenues, tab A, 3.7 million, plus we had the 1.5 million transfers of unused capital funds back to the general fund. So we're talking about being more than $4 million in the plus at the end of the year here. And, you know, I can understand the reasons why you want to finance things and everything else, but this over $4 million is representing, in my mind, somewhat of an overtaxation of the town. So in addition to the amount that we went up in our budget to have all this excess money left over at the end of the year, I just wonder if there's any way to look at what we're going to use those. I always get the wrong word. It's not appropriation. Assignments. You know, two come to mind, and one of them is the roads. We're going to put almost $2 million into the roads, where when we look at our actual expenditures for the last 5 years, we went from less than $500,000 in excess of $1 million, almost $1.5 million 1 year. So we made this huge jump in what we're doing for pavement, and now we want to make an assignment of almost $2 million on top of what's already in the budget. Also, our unassigned fund balance, we went from our policy of 10 million, 10% up to 15%. We were under 15% when we made that decision, but according to what I'm reading here and what I heard at the town council meeting, that fund is going to be at 15.74%, and that 7.74% comes out to be, I think, about $700,000, almost $800,000. So I'm just wondering why we can't use some of our excess funds that we have to bring down the amount of money that we need to bond for this building. And if you can't accept that, at least use the $780,000 to pay for the renovations, because that's under $700,000. So that would be a way of decreasing the debt that the town is in, and also using the money that we currently have. That money is in our bank account right now of that 15.74% and then assigned fund balance, using some of it to even pay for the renovations and then bond the rest of it, I think would be a wise use of the taxpayer funds.
Brandon, would you like to respond to that?
I would.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Micah, by the way. There were a few things on there, and first I want to talk about roads. 5 years ago, we were at a significant deficit in the maintenance of our roads. I recall Brandon saying if he had $25 million or something like that, some ungodly amount of money to spend on our roads, he could, because they were in that kind of a condition. And what we've been doing for the past 5 years, you see that increase, and that is making up for the deficits of the past. But again, what we're spending on roads is quite a diversion against whether or not we should take out a bond for the purchase of this building. I think it's somewhat of a gripe that needs to be talked about at another time. unassigned fund balance was a unanimous decision amongst this board at the recommendation of professional finance accounting folks, our auditors, to increase to 15% of our budget, and we're not there yet. So not only did we kind of borrow from some for this past year's budget, we have quite a bit to put back to get to our good goal of keeping our top-rated credit, it's not a credit score for us, what's it called? Bond rating. So that we can borrow money at the best rate. I know right now, I'm pretty sure, every member of this board owns their property.
Ask the bank.
A significant number of the board I know of, maybe everyone, owes money on it. And I know that I'm in a position right now that I can earn more money in interest with cash in the bank than I have to pay in interest on my home loan. And I don't know if necessarily the town is in that good of a position, but borrowing money is not necessarily a bad financial decision just because you have the cash. We have a commitment to keep 15% of our annual budget in unassigned fund balance, and we're not there yet, and I think we're missing that commitment. So saying we should be using cash for this good opportunity now, I think is a poor decision.
I'd like to clarify, it was at the town council meeting that you said that unassigned fund balance was 15.74%. Is that correct or not?
Based on
On
proposals that are being presented in the year-end financial transactions, that is where it would be.
So after all the proposals are met, we're still gonna be left at 15.74%.
Right.
So we are over the 15% that was recommended.
Great. That'll be the first time.
We just changed it this year.
Okay. Brandon, do you need to respond further to this?
I'd rather not, but I think what I would say for the record is that we're recommending those year-end transactions. Those transactions should be approved as presented. There are a number of important objectives they have, one of which is the roads. Without these year-end transactions, without the assignment on fund balance for roads, I have essentially no road budget. And what you're going to hear from the Director of Public Works is that, again, we should be putting in about $1.725 million a year. So, Bruce likes to hear this. Bruce is in back there. He can spend whatever we can appropriate for roads. And, he can do it fairly quickly. And we're also getting into sections of roads that have more surface area. They need more intensive rehabilitation. It's not just crack sealing. So I think those things are important. I think that at some point, perhaps, and I wouldn't do it now because this is in front of you. I don't think you want to be in the position of trying to change language that's been prepared by bond counsel. Like, this really needs to go forward as a package. If at some point, the council can talk about it, perhaps it gets to the Board of Finance, there can be some discussion about using some capital to offset a future debt issuance. Perhaps as the boards look at it, we want to do, some assignment or some use of unassigned fund balance to offset, the total bond that goes to the market whenever you bundle up the fire engines, the communication system in this. I mean, this is just one piece of it. That's a thought. I wouldn't touch it tonight. This is baked. The language is done, and it needs to be approved so we can stay on track to get to the town meeting on the 10th.
Do any other members of the board have questions?
Move to approve 242502 as written in the recommended motion of our agenda.
Do we have a second? All right. All in favor?
Do we
Aye.
still have opportunity to discuss?
Well, we can discuss if you like. That's, although in accordance with our tradition, we discussed ahead of time. But if you'd like to discuss now, we can. All right.
So,
Here. Okay.
yeah, I'm
Go ahead.
ready to, so I'm just collecting my thoughts. I hear both sides of an argument. I hear one side of an argument about borrowing money when rates are relatively low. What do we think we can get this bonded at?
We're looking at about 4% based on our municipal advisor's cursory estimate. We won't know much more until we get closer to issuance, but
Okay.
that's the estimate that he's provided.
That includes the fact that some of this is not town.
Yes, that's why it's as high as that.
Okay.
So 4% money is pretty good right now. Being at 15 hits our goal. Being over 15, we have excess. So I can understand where we want to try to fund with cash with what we can. But I want to balance that with, here's my concern. I'm not concerned with this at all. I could easily vote for this. What I don't want to happen is by the time we bring this to the townspeople, there is a fight about where money is going and how we're spending it. And I don't want to see sort of what happened at budget time and have the townspeople shoot this down because an argument could possibly be made that we have some cash that we're not using. I think it's very smart for this to go forward with and purchase. If I was doing a cost benefit analysis where I work, I would say renting a property for 12.9 years when we can buy that property and have something at the end of 12.9 years, it's a very clean decision to buy the property. So what we're really talking about is the financing. And if this is what's required right now, Brandon, so that we can get it to the people, I want to make sure, or I want to be able to somehow ensure that if there's an opportunity to use some of these funds, we make a commitment to doing that. So that when we go to the people, we are collectively going with an endorsement of the project and not having the town argue about we should be using cash that we have on hand to do this. I want to make sure they get their building that they've needed to have for multiple years. So if we could figure out how to get to a place like possibly Brandon's recommendation on forward funding, that we bring it up then. I'm willing to entertain anything that makes sure the town gets this building and supports our Board of Education, supports something that looks like Avon when these people need to bring new teachers into the building, new administrators into the building, something that we can be proud of to say you're working in this town that is set up well to educate your students and you want to work here. Yes.
I don't think that we are in a position to be able to change how financing is going, because it would have to go back to the town, and then it would have to come back to us, and then we would be off of our opportunity to purchase under the current contract. We'd have to go back to the bonding office and all those kinds of things. I believe that there were solid considerations had in bonding this amount. And if we can ensure that those considerations are also a part of our presentation to the people, and maybe expand upon this now and put that up on the website soon, that we can help to justify the amount of the bond and not using cash, but then move forward with this motion so that we can stay on schedule.
We could certainly do that. It would be very hard to pause on this. To your point, we've got the language that's been prepared, the train is on the tracks. There are other things that you have to keep in mind though, for the long run. And I know it's over 15%, but that's not that much over. And, 15% for a AAA rated community is like respectable. It's still on the low side. And you also have some headwinds. The board used $1,250,000 last year to keep the tax levy down. So, that's use of a one-time revenue. You're gonna have to find another one-time revenue for next year, which may mean pulling down more unassigned fund balance or increasing the tax levy because you have to make up for that. So you might want to keep some powder dry for that. And you've got some other issues like, the motor vehicle tax you're not going to get. So you may just want to take a step back and holistically evaluate how you might want to deploy some of that cash before just.
Yeah, and a couple of other points. The bonds spread this burden of purchasing a building over 15 years, rather than just hitting the taxpayers with it right now, whether we have the cash right now or not. If we have an excess of $750,000 in cash, that will, in some form or another, make it back to the people. If we have to increase the levy less, or have, the town isn't operating at, let's see what we can get. The town is operating at, what do we need? And so if we have an excess of $750,000 that we don't need, then we lower the levy the next year. I mean, it all works out to go back to the taxpayers for what we don't need. So I mean, you borrow the $750,000 or you don't, but this is the whole burden of this building, and being spread over 15 years, I think is a smart move.
So I just want to point out that our interest income for this year right now is on track to be almost $3 million at the end of the year if we keep the current thing. So to say that we're going to deplete anything is just not true. We're already at 232% over budget for just the 4 months that we're in right now. It's projected to be 2.8 million at that current rate. So I am positive that we're going to have excess funds at the end of the year next year. So
shouldn't we put them in the bank account and earn more interest on them?
Mr. Chair, could we put a stop to the back and forth, please? And could I just, I think what the point that was trying to be made is not about this motion, not about this vote, but about making a commitment to going forward, doing things differently, because we find ourselves in this position every year.
correct.
Last 3 years.
All right,
That's your
let's,
future. So.
all right.
he was-
Why don't I call
there
the
any-
question?
Mr. Chair, one more thing. Harry had asked about a commitment. Can we just have a commitment, like it's a statement? It doesn't mean anything is happening tonight. Is that what you're looking for, Harry?
Yes.
No, we have to approve this tonight.
We are going to approve this tonight. He's
Okay.
asking for something in addition.
A commitment to our colleagues that we are going to look at the excess funds that we have and appropriate them where we can so that we don't continue to look like
I could make that commitment,
we're
absolutely.
putting a lot of money in the cupboard and we're just not using it.
I think that's a part of the job to make that commitment, and so I would have zero problem
All
with
right.
it. We have a question been called, so it is time for a vote.
Indeed. All right. So we have the motion made in accordance with the packet distributed, seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
None, we are unanimous.
All right. And no abstentions. Good. All right. So the next item on the agenda is the senior center HVAC replacement and community room improvements. Who wanted to speak to that? Brandon, is that you or is it Tom?
Tom?
Okay.
No, Tom, I won't, you don't have to speak to it. Yeah.
I know you've moved on, but is it appropriate, can we ask Houston, there was one thing I wanted to be able to add on that I thought maybe the board of finance should hear?
Yeah.
I apologize, I know you didn't ask, Houston, it's Bridget.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
asked,
Bridget.
can I, through the chair, just, I think there's something else that the board of finance should know that I'm not 100% certain has made it to you yet.
Is it your email?
Nope.
You're right.
So because it's capital improvement budget season, as you know, and we already presented in front of the town council, but we're not, it hasn't moved this far yet. And I just think, first of all, thank you for voting to move it forward, because folks that work in the office would be very happy to hear that and excited, waiting for December 10. But I think it's important to know, back to just thinking about hearing what you were saying and some conversation around the finances in town and the divisions that might happen there. One of the things that, we've heard quite a bit about is, why waste money on the building where people work that students are not? Generally speaking, we don't necessarily disagree with the spirit of that. We have put money repeatedly in capital into the schools instead of into this building for that reason, trying to make sure that programming students have what they need first, and the rest of us doing work behind the scenes to help them do that are further down the list. However, we've already talked about this, as employers, we have to make sure that the town of Avon isn't liable for what might happen to people, but that's in a building that's in disrepair. But that aside, what we're more concerned about from a financial aspect right now, and I think it's important for you to know this as the Board of Finance, is that one of the things that came down the pike after we even started looking for at this building was new legislation related to HVAC from the state of Connecticut, and any public school building, which we are included in, has to meet requirements that our building cannot meet as is at all. And so by next year, if we don't meet those requirements, we have a serious problem for having employees in the building and cannot have students there. We're right now not necessarily in compliance at present. So in our capital improvement budget that we presented to the town council, we right now have the placeholder in there, or at least the start of the funding that would help to bring that building at 34 Simsbury into compliance, which has to start with the electrical, because we can't fix the ventilation without fixing the electrical. So in our capital budget right now, we have over $500,000 for that work to start, because if this project does not move through, we will have to do it to be able to keep the building open and keep working there.
For September of next year?
And so I think that's just important as another piece of,
Information.
that really feels like certainly throwing good money after bad if we're going to spend more than $500,000 just to finish
Stay where you are.
phase one.
That won't even get it done.
No,
Right.
that's
Just to
phase
be
one.
perfectly clear, that will not get it done.
So it makes it
That's
more
just-
compelling, in other
So-
words.
Yes. So I know you just voted it forward and didn't necessarily need to know that to do that, but I think it's an important consideration for people to understand.
I think you're gonna need to make sure that gets brought up during the meeting on the
Yeah.
10th.
It's important.
It will. I
Because it's a
just
good chunk.
thought here at least
As a reduction.
that you would all know. And we're hoping to be able to cross that out of the capital improvement budget.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
All
what
right, ladies and gentlemen, let us work to order. So thank you, Bridget, for your comments.
Houston.
Tom, the senior center.
Okay. Houston, where would you like me to start with this? I gave a pretty involved write-up in the background materials. Would it be best if I just kind of gave an overview of that?
I think an overview would be adequate.
Okay. One new face, at least to the Board of Finance. I've got Bruce Williams in the back. Bruce is our Director of Public Works, and he has been very involved in this project, and I brought him in just because there might be some areas that he's more familiar with than I am. In fact, I'd be surprised if there weren't. So, the long story short of this, we have our senior center. It was built in 1988. The HVAC system at the senior center, there are two separate systems. We have 7 air condensers that provide the air conditioning for the building, and we have 2 gas-fired boilers that provide the heating. In about 2021 or so, we had one of the condensers for the air conditioner go down. As we typically do with these things, we had our on-call HVAC technician tradesman come in and do some diagnostics and, basically pointed out that the system is original to the building. It's very old, and it's probably time to look at a more holistic replacement of the system. And indeed, if you look at the condensers, they look old. They are covered in rust on the, I guess it would be the west side of the senior center building. You can peek over the fence. There are 4 of them that are planted right there. They don't look so good. So, based on our consultant's recommendation, we basically got an estimate. The estimate to have the air conditioning system replaced was about $140,000. We did a request for proposals. In the request for proposals, what we asked for was an efficient HVAC system. So we got 2 responses back to this request for proposals. One, no surprise, was from tradesmen in the amount of $135,000. The other one came in from another company, and their recommendation was to use a system called a refrigerant flow system. So Bruce is really interested in these things, and kind of took a look at it. He had some familiarity with that type of technology. We have smaller versions of that system installed at Countryside Park. There's another one that's installed at the new museum for the Historical Society. And then we have, of course, the somewhat non-traditional solution that we landed on at the library. So Bruce started tracking it down and talked to a number of engineers, talked to a number of manufacturers, representatives, and really came to the conclusion that the VRF system was going to be the best solution for that building, really for a couple of reasons. And I go into more detail in my background memo, but I can't do it the same justice Bruce does. So if you want quasi-technical and not at the PhD level, but still better than I can do, just let me know and Bruce will do it. But basically these systems, the beauty of it is that it serves as a combined cooling and heating system. So where the air conditioning system was original to the building, 1988, so is the heating system. And we have 2 gas-fired boilers that, come to find out, were originally spec'd for residential use. They've worked fine over the years, whatever. But it's like the kiss of death when you go to see your mechanic, right? Technician says you're on borrowed time. I don't know. We're gonna do the best we can. So with this VRF system, it solves both the heating and the cooling problem. And, the advantage of the system, by using refrigerant it is able to keep a much more uniform climate within the building. And my very layperson's way of thinking about that is whenever a building, an older building gets out of balance, you hear it at Company One all the time. You're just sitting there listening to something, minding your own business, and all of a sudden, it's like the air handler ticks on, every fan in the building comes on, and it's like high energy until it gets to where that temperature should be. This system doesn't quite work that way. It recirculates air within the building, and whenever you have to bring in air from outside the building, it does it with much more efficient intake fans. Bruce, how am I doing?
Right on target.
All right. Tell me if I'm not. Give me the hook. So the long and short of it is that the VRF system is, it is the more efficient technology. It is not a new technology. In fact, I don't like to compare Avon to Canton, but in this instance, it bears noting that Canton just installed a very similar system in their new quote-unquote fire station. So that's a recent use of the system that I think, gives some comfort. We've talked again to the Gordian Group, which is with Easy IQC. Bruce has talked to a couple of other communities that have installed the systems. They seem to be having good experience. They seem to require less maintenance over time. And in terms of useful life, we're looking at getting hopefully 20 plus years out of this. I'll spare you all the background about, the purchasing regulations and the Easy IQC. Bottom line is, Easy IQC is a purchasing option we have available through the Capital Region Council of Governments. It's great, it's pre-bid, it's very competitive, and it is entirely compliant with the town's purchasing regulations. So here's the bottom line. After all of that, we tried to put it together in a table at the bottom. And, we've got the two sides, the like for like is kind of like if we stick with the most efficient equipment, that is the status quo. In other words, air condensers for, the air conditioning system, boilers for, the furnaces. What you've got there is a cost of about $239,000. $165,000 for the HVAC, for the air. You have to add for the stamped drawings, so you can get a building permit. You have to include the electrical work at $10,000. There are no rebates. And then you also know that we're going to have to replace the boilers probably sooner than later. So that gets you down to a net cost of $239,000. On the VRF system, you got a project cost of $336,609. That does include your engineered stamp drawings. That does include your electrical work. There is a rebate. There was a discrepancy. The correct number is $56,000. If you look in that last paragraph, it says 50. Correct number is 56.
Thank you.
No future boiler replacement would be needed. And that brings us down to $280,609. I know there was a question that came up about, having some more objective return on investment calculated. We talked with an engineer about it. The estimate that came back it was $8,000. I think that's probably a little bit light. You're probably looking at $10,000 to have an engineer sort of sit down and pencil this out. Here's my recommendation. And this is based on my discussions with Bruce and importantly, Bruce's discussions with the manufacturers, representatives, and, the engineers, all the different people that he spoke to. I would recommend that you go with the VRF system. You know, there is a delta between the two of about $80,000. I am confident, which means Bruce is confident, that you're gonna realize the efficiencies in this consolidating air conditioning and heating system that are gonna equate to at least $2,000 a year over the life of the system, which makes it economic.
All right, do we have any questions?
Bruce, is there anything else, Bruce? Did you?
No, I think you touched on it. Some of the things that gas meter will go away to the tune of $10,000 to $12,000 a year. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, but won't the electric go up? I mean, you're still.
They're so efficient and they're not like these conventional air handlers. You can hear them when you're in a place and they fire up. They just take a tremendous amount of load to start. That all goes away. They're managing the flow of the heat and the cooling throughout the building. It allows you to push hot air into a spot that needs it from another section of the building, you know, without having to just bring in the air, heat it, ship it out. So there are great efficiencies with this. You know, the literature's 30 to 40% to a conventional HVAC system. But these aren't big numbers with, you know, $10,000 to $12,000 a year in gas being used within the building, or the electricity. That's very similar. That building uses about $10,000 to $12,000 a year in electricity, but it's not all on the HVAC system. You know?
Right.
We've got some exterior parking lot lighting, that's all sodium metal halide bulbs. So there's other demands on the system, but you know, it's not going to be a short-term turnaround on your capital. It's definitely going to be a long-term. You know, I guess the definition of short and long, I would say short would be anything within 5 years. It's just my view of a short term, but there's definitely savings here, and the technology's there. It's being used in a lot of commercial and industrial buildings. It's made for buildings of this size, not for residential homes. It's designed basically for the commercial buildings.
All right, further questions?
Yes, so let me clarify, Brandon, so the savings is only $2,000 a year?
I can't say that exactly, that's a guess. What I'm saying is I think it's going to be at least $2,000 a year.
Got it, so it's $40K differential to upsize from the regular to the VRF, so if it is $2,000, it's, 20 years. The reason I think some members of the Board of Finance last meeting asked for more financial analysis around this was we were presented with $1.40 with the initial one versus $2.80 without any expectation or further clarification of how we get that payback. And, the like for like is a little better explanation here to go from now $239 to $280. It's $40,000 difference. It's a 17% premium. If it's hopefully more than $2,000 a year, I think we're probably splitting hairs. But thank you for this additional information.
Thank you.
Further question?
Send Tom to HVAC school.
Move to approve 24-25-05.
Do we have a second?
Second?
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Carries unanimously. All right, the next one we've got is 24/25-07, review and discussion of fiscal year 25/26 budget.
Yeah, just quickly, we are.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. We are kind of in the thick of it right now. Bridget's probably a little bit further along. I think she likes to get her proposed budget to the Board of Ed by the end of the calendar year. I'm going to be more like the end of January, early February. But, we're both talking to our respective department heads and looking to see how health insurance is coming in and all those things, just preliminary stages of building the budget.
All right, 24/25-08, review, discussion, and approval of fiscal year 23-24 year-end adjustments.
All right, thanks, Houston. So I'm going to take you through the year-end transactions booklet that you've received for fiscal year 23-24. And I'm not going to go into the detail included in the booklet. There's
Good.
a whole lot, yeah. There's a lot in there, and this is a little later agenda item. So I prepared a PowerPoint presentation to give you a summary. Having said that, I'll stop at various points, or you could just stop me if you'd like me to dig into any more detail. So I'll start by just summarizing what's in the booklet. The first tab is tab A, and that shows you a summary of fiscal year budget to actual results in the general fund, as well as documentation of transfers and encumbrances for the year. In addition to that, there's a whole lot of detail. There's a system-generated report that shows you a breakdown of all the accounts at the end of the year from a budget to actual basis. Tab C includes 6 supplemental appropriation resolutions associated with our special revenue funds. Tab D would include our proposed assignments and fund balance transfers in the general fund for fiscal year end. And tab E includes 2 appropriations of fund balance from capital projects funds. So turning our attention to the PowerPoint, I'll take you through a summary of the results. And nothing that I talk about here is going to be new to any of you, based on the fact that over the last several months, I've been trying to provide some updates as to what you could expect when we go through these year-end transactions. So starting with the slide that is presented here, I'll take you through the general fund budget to actual results and some of the primary drivers of those. As far as revenues are concerned, we had a favorable variance of about 2.73% of the general fund. That amounts to about $2.8 million. Biggest drivers of that, no surprise, interest income. We've talked about it a lot. The favorable variance on that particular line item is about $2.5 million. We also had intergovernmental grant revenue show a favorable variance of about $648,000. A lot of that is related to the municipal revenue sharing grant, which we do not always receive, and it doesn't appear that we'll be receiving that in fiscal year 25. Moving on to expenditures, as we often discuss, expenditures tend to trend a lot more closely to budget compared to revenues, and that's no different in fiscal year 24, where we saw a favorable variance of about 5.3% to the general fund budget. The drivers for that variance can be highlighted on this slide. Salary savings due to turnover, so a number of positions are vacated throughout the year. As those positions are vacant, or if they are refilled with somebody who's making a lower salary than the more experienced person that they were replacing, it results in budget savings. As far as Public Works overtime is concerned, that is related to winter weather events and the severity of those events. So we typically would see budget savings there if there were not so many of those severe winter weather events. And so ultimately, positive budgetary operating results in the general fund were about $3.4 million. So the next slide will summarize the 6 resolutions included for supplemental appropriations in special revenue funds. So we often look at these as sort of housekeeping items that are taken care of at the end of the fiscal year. These are not related to the general fund. Each of these funds has their own revenue source outside of the property tax levy. They are budgeted at the beginning of the year. However, as the year goes on, oftentimes revenue is recognized beyond what was budgeted. And at the end of the fiscal year, to keep things in compliance with the charter requirements on a budgetary perspective, we put in resolutions to recommend supplemental appropriations for the amounts that were earned in excess of the budgeted amount. So I've listed all 6 of the funds and the dollar amounts of the resolution on this slide. And I'll pause if anybody wants to go over year-end results or the supplemental appropriation requests before we get into transfers and assignments.
No,
All
looks
right.
like we don't have any questions. Why don't we move on?
All right, sounds good. So tab D will take you through our assignment recommendations and our transfer recommendations for the general fund at fiscal year end. Again, none of these are going to be new to you. We've discussed each of them in the past, maybe not in a whole lot of detail, but they have been brought up. The first three assignments that are proposed on this slide are standard year-end assignments. You generally see these every year, and they are to offset future OPEB contributions, future pension contributions, and to set aside funds for future unanticipated capital asset replacements. The next few items are a little more unique. We talked about fiscal year 2025's budgeted use of unassigned fund balance. You'll recall that we used $1.25 million to help offset the tax levy through the fiscal year 25 budget process. What this assignment would do would be to come in and replenish that use of fund balance. We also talked about the town's obligations under the URAA as they relate to the Avon Place apartment fire that took place earlier in this calendar year. We are recommending $200,000 in case there's an instance in which we would need to supplement the fiscal year 25 budget to help keep control over those cost overruns. And then finally, we are recommending an assignment for road improvements in the amount of $1,975,000. So that's all the assignments. Just a reminder, an assignment is basically a placeholder. It's a classification of fund balance. In order for us to spend these assigned amounts, it would require further action through an appropriation. More often than not, an appropriation of that nature would take place through the annual budget process, although it could also take place through a supplemental appropriation.
All right.
Oh,
Any further questions on that point? Okay, Tom, go ahead. I think you're getting close to wrapping up.
yeah, we could stop if you have a question about an assignment. I also have transfers to discuss as well.
Yeah.
You want me to just
Right.
keep powering through or?
Yeah, keep going through with the transfers.
Okay, all right, so I'll take you through the transfers that we're recommending in tab D. Different from an assignment, a transfer is ultimately an action that would be recorded as of the end of the fiscal year, so June 30, 2024. It's not like an assignment where it's a classification that would need further appropriation in the future. The first one is a proposed transfer of $400,000 to the medical claims fund. You may recall, if you were here for last year's year-end meeting, we did have our insurance consultant discuss a recommendation for what our medical claims fund should have as a balance at any point in time throughout the fiscal year. We did evaluate that balance as of the end of August based on some of the claims results that we were seeing. And based on our analysis, in order to stay at the recommended level, we came up to be about $400,000 short. And so in response to that, we are proposing a transfer of $400,000 to the medical claims fund to get the balance of that fund up to where it's supposed to be. The next item is another recurring transaction. This is a transfer of $100,000 to the compensated absences fund. That fund is used to pay for sick and vacation leave amounts that are owed to employees who are departing service with the town. We maintain a balance in that fund to cover those costs. And then the last three transfers that are highlighted in tab D. The first is a $4,800 transfer, basically to close what we refer to as the post-retirement benefit fund. This is a precursor to the OPEB trust fund. So before we had an OPEB trust fund, the town took the initiative to create a special revenue fund to put funding aside to cover future retiree medical costs. Once the OPEB trust fund came into being, this fund no longer had any use, and so we have whittled away its balance to the point where now all that's left is $4,800, and we are proposing closing that to the general fund. Finally, the last two transfers listed here are transfers from the Capital Projects Fund and the Capital and Non-Recurring Expenditures Fund to the general fund. And what these relate to is capital projects that have completed and they've been wrapped up in fiscal year 2024. And these are balances that are left over after the completion of those projects. So we are recommending that they be transferred back to the general fund to kind of close the loop on the funding of those projects. And that'll take me to tab E, which has somewhat related requests or recommendations, I should say. And so there are two of them. They are fund balance appropriations, one from the Capital Projects Fund, which is our fund number 2, and the other is the Capital Non-Recurring Expenditures Fund, fund number 3. So the two transfers that I just mentioned, they pertain to more recent data. However, these transfers pertain to what we refer to as residual equity. And so this is going back and looking at capital project activity over the course of several years. The projects that we are referring to and that pertain to these recommendations date from fiscal year 2009 to fiscal year 2021. And just a little bit of background on this, and I apologize if I've gone through this already with you, but just to recap, looking into these balances was prompted by a review, probably my first year of working in the town, where Brandon and I had sat down and we took a look at the annual comprehensive financial report. And Brandon had asked me why there's such a difference between the fund balance in the Capital Projects Fund and the listing of outstanding appropriations for our ongoing capital projects. Because in theory, you should be able to reconcile between those two things. I didn't have a good answer at the time, so I did some digging, and I ultimately uncovered the fact that going back over the course of several years, there were various transactions that resulted in an accumulation of fund balance in each of these funds. And the detail in your booklet can kind of break this down. It breaks it down on a line-by-line detail, but I find it's easiest to kind of summarize these items into 3 general categories. The first of which being interfund debt equity. And so a lot of the buildup of the fund balance in the Capital Projects Fund occurred as a result of the fact that when the Capital Projects Fund would issue debt for projects dating back, a lot of these would date back to the high school renovation project back in 2009 and 10, where debt was issued. And oftentimes that debt would be issued on a temporary basis, so there'd be a bond anticipation note issued for a year. That bond anticipation note would be paid back, and then a bond would be issued when it became time to issue the final financing for the project. So in several cases, the bond anticipation note would be higher than the bond that would come in to replace it. The difference between those would be paid by the general fund. So as the general fund pays these debt obligations of the Capital Projects Fund, it results in an increase to the balance of that fund. It's as though the general fund has transferred a resource into the Capital Projects Fund to pay down a liability that was accounted for within that fund. So that's the first category, and that drives a lot of the amount that accumulated there. The next category would pertain to reimbursements from third parties, primarily the state. So if a project was appropriated 100% by general fund budgeted funds, and then it was completed, and the state came in and reimbursed 50% of the cost of that project at a later date, if that reimbursement is recorded as revenue into the Capital Projects Fund, it will add to the balance of that fund. And if it's never journaled back to the general fund, it will just stay there for as long as it takes for action to take place and for that transfer to be made. And then the third category is probably the most simple. A project is completed. There was a budgeted balance of a certain amount, but the project came in under that budget. The amount that remains left over of that balance will remain in the Capital Project Fund balance. again, unless an action is taken to transfer the funds back to its originating source. In most instances, that originating source would be the general fund, which is why item number 1 on the slide here is primarily general fund transfers and only a small amount going back to the sewer fund. So one other important thing to mention about this is you'll notice that fiscal year 2021 is the most recent date that pertain to these residual equity transfers. That's because once we recognized that there was a buildup of these fund balances over time, we did establish a standard operating procedure whereby on an annual basis, we are reconciling between the ongoing capital projects and the balance in these capital projects funds to make sure that anything that remains at the conclusion of a project is transferred back to its originating source. And so that's why you saw those when we went through the proposed transfers in tab D. The last 2 transfers that we were proposing pertain to amounts that are being sent back as a result of that reconciliation process. And so as I mentioned, there's a lot more detail in the last couple of pages in tab B of your booklets. Finally, just to conclude, positive operating results of $3.4 million in fiscal year 23-24, driven primarily by interest income and some intergovernmental grant revenue. This has allowed us to propose assignments and fund balance transfers to address several needs that were identified as far as road improvements, capital asset replacements, and replenishing fund balance. And it also gives us the opportunity, or also rolled into this analysis, is a proposal to clear out those residual equities in the capital projects funds and get them back to an equilibrium with ongoing capital. Ultimately, our unassigned fund balance would increase as a result of this activity to a percentage of 15.74% of expenditures and transfers out. So that's the conclusion of this presentation. If you want me to go into any more detail, or if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Tom?
Brian does.
Ryan?
So, Tom, isn't it true that by putting $1.6 million back into the general fund balance for items number 1, 2, and 4, that no true tax reductions of this magnitude actually occurred for the 24-25 budget?
No true tax reductions?
Correct.
1, 2, and 4. So I see 4 is the replenishing of the fund balance.
Yep, so that was a reduction.
1 and 2.
That was a reduction in the tax increase.
Right.
24-25 budget.
So yeah, so we're using fund balance to, we used fund balance to reduce the property tax levy as part of the fiscal year 25 budget. Now we're replenishing that amount with results from the preceding fiscal year.
Correct.
Which, you know, I think as we were discussing the budget process, it was anticipated that that would be the way that we replenish that use. As far as 1 and 2, it's anticipated that we will use these to offset pension and OPEB contributions in an upcoming budget period.
But those were the reductions made at this last budget hearing, those
That's what
specific
we
dollar
said now.
amounts, as I recall.
We reduced OPEB as part of the budget process, but this is not in direct response to that. You'll notice that these transactions, I don't know.
Same dollar amount.
I think that might be coincidental.
Yeah, we do it every year,
We
right?
do it every year, yeah. I don't know how far back you'd have to go to see where this wasn't done. I'm not sure where it originated. However, every budget, if you take a look at every annual budget, there is a component of fund balance assignment that is used to offset pension and OPEB contributions, usually in these amounts, 150,000 or 200,000. When you consider the magnitude of those contributions, it may not mean all that much, like the pension is up about $4 million.
So at the very least, item number 4, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's much more significant, and it's much more irregular, I guess, and it's in direct response to the fiscal year 25 budget process.
Great, so that's an affirmative for at least item number 4. Thank you. So that's my first
All right.
question. My second question, Houston.
Yep.
Is there a budget for road improvements? Do we not have a budget for road improvements?
So we typically budget for road improvements through the annual budget process, through the capital budget. So oftentimes, in most years, Public Works Department will make a request for road improvements budget, and depending on how the budget process goes, typically there's an amount that is approved. I think last year, you could take a look at the fiscal year 25 budget. The entirety of the road improvements budget came from an assignment that was placed last year through the year-end transactions.
Got it.
So I looked at it today online. It says the budget adopted for 25 was 1.78 million. And I know 1.4 million of it came from an assignment from the year before, didn't it?
Yes, yeah, and that, we
So-
also get some
It's like
state
300.
grant funding.
It was
Town
like
aid road
300,000 was in the budget
Right.
somewhere.
through grant funding from the state. So Town Aid Road is a grant that we receive every year. That is, we account for that grant in a separate special revenue fund, and we do budget for that. And we use a chunk of it for road improvements, and then a chunk of it for road salt, for treating the roads during the winter. There's another grant, the LoCIP grant, Local Capital Improvement Program grant, also from the state, that we typically use for the roads budget. That last year was about $170,000.
All right, we got further questions. All right, can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Sounds like
Yes.
it's unanimous.
Nope, I oppose.
Brian opposes.
I oppose item number 6.
Friedem opposes. Got it. All right, the records will so reflect. Item 24/25-09, supplemental appropriation for the street sweeper of $26,763.12.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Sounds unanimous, although it's always hard to tell on the camera. All right, good. Then the last item is other business. Any other business that needs to be brought before us? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Can I have a motion to adjourn at 8:48?
What piece of paper we didn't vote
Hold
on?
on.
Oh, we didn't vote on it?
No, this is
The agenda is.
405.
HVAC for
That's-
civic.
Oh, that's part of it.
That was
Yeah,
part of
we
that.
voted.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
second paper. I'd like to keep my papers in order. Thank you, sir.
Move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, hearing no abstentions, unanimously adjourned at
8:50.
8:50.
8:50. Have a lovely evening.
You too, safe travels.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Dropping out.